Okay, so next is we are going to make use of CSS selector, right? Now CSS selector is also very powerful and flexible. Let's look at some theory and then we'll move on to trying examples on that. So what I will do is I will create locating elements using not this one. Let me see my Selenium CSS. Okay, so this is where we will have our CSS related example. Let me delete all this. Okay, so first of all, let's look at some theory and then we'll come to try out actually in the code. So let's explore some basic CSS selector that can be used in Selenium WebDriver. Selenium WebDrivers by class provides CSS selector method for locating elements using CSS selector, right? Uh, um, Finding with absolute path. Now, what is an absolute path? Absolute path is a path which is absolute, which starts from the top to the bottom, right? Now, before we even do any of this, if you are making use of Firefox, there are two plugins you can install here. Okay, so what are those two plugins? Those two plugins are Firebug and Firepath. So if you will go here, and we will try it out a little while later. So if you have not done already, we will do the installation of two plugins, Firebug and Firepath, right? So if you install it successfully, and if you come to, let's say, this particular page here, let's say we open this page. Let me open another page, not this one. So let me open this page for you. Right? Now, if you right click and inspect with Firebug, you will have an option of Firebug, and here you can find the CSS selector or CSS of that particular element, right? Either you can do it manually, but there are ways to find CSS using this tool as well, right? Before using the tool, let us look at how we can do it manually, and then maybe you can do it with the help of a tool, right? So let's say I go here and I choose CSS. Here I type HTML, right? HTML space. If I say space, then I say body, right? Then it goes to body. Inside the body, I can say form. Inside the form, I can say field set, FIELDSET, right? And then field set, I can say div, div, right? Inside div, I'll say input, right? INPUT, right? So this is using CSS absolute path. Absolute means from top, not relative to something, but from the top. So I can take this whole path, and from here I can say that drivr dot find element by dot CSS selector, right? And here I'll specify that CSS, right? And I'll close this here. And what does it return for me? It returns a web element, right? Okay, so this returns a web element WE, right? So I've got the element, right? Which is that element, the first input tag, input text box, right? So let's verify whether it is correct. So I'll say web w dot send keys, and I'll say what I'm going to say, CSS selector, right? And if I try to run this program, right click, run as Java application, let us see what happens. So you will see that in the first text box, it has entered the CSS selector entry, right? So this is how we make use of absolute path, right? Then next thing which we are going to talk about is this we have tried. Same thing you can do it with the greater than sign. This also means the same thing. So if you will go back here on this particular page, where was that? Where was I? Okay, here. So if you even make it greater than head, so you can, if you want to work on more than one, so it is same elements, you can say elements, so it will give you all the input tag under this tag, right? So if you say driver dot find elements, it will give you all the elements under the div, under this div, right? So if you see, if you have noticed it carefully, if inside head, let me put it back here, right? So it actually selects all the input. Can you see both the inputs are selected, right? So if you say elements 2, 3, all the elements that are there in that particular page, it will be returned. But when you say element, it will give you the first element, right? Elements means all the input tags in that particular tree will be returned to you, right? So this is how it works with the what you say absolute path, right? Then when you are working on relative path, you if you simply say CSS selector of input. Okay, so this is relative path. So just 1 minute uh, before we go. Okay, so this is another way of doing it. You can even put a greater than sign and it still means the same thing, right? Now, you now this particular strategy, absolute path has a problem, meaning that suppose inside HTML there is a body, then div, then form, then input, right? What if I remove div or add something in between? Then this path will not work for me, right? So if in this tree, DOM tree, which I was showing to you earlier on, I was explaining one DOM tree, right? This one. If I want to add something here as well, then this path is going to change, right? So for example, there was a tree which had elements here, right? So this was A, B, C, path was A, B, C. But if it, between B and C I added something X, so it will become A, B, X, C, right? So in that case, this absolute path is actually not going to work for me. Then I have to use relative path, right? So how does relative path work? If you, this is a very simple example. If you say by.css selector input, it will get you the first input element of that particular page or DOM page or DOM structure, right? Similarly, if you say input dot login, dot is used for class. Remember when we were writing class, it is done with a dot here. Yes, if you will remember view page source. So if dot is for basically classes, right? So it will return an input tag for which the class is this one, or rather, if you will go here, find the input tag which has a class as login applied to it, right? If you say dot login, login is a class again, right? So find any element which has this class applied to it, right? Similarly, if you say input hash username, hash is for ID, right? Remember I told you that when we were looking at CSS, hash is for ID of an element. Yes. Okay, so let me explain this quickly with a small example. So I'll say hash of something, hash of f, let's say f name, right? So if it is a dot, we use it for a class here, right? So can you see class here? This is background color is yeah, here is first name, and ID instead of ID this. So this is a class here, right? CLASS. If it is a dot and if it is ID, then this is f name, right? So I will copy and paste it here, and it will get applied to this. So one is red and one is yellow and one is red. Fine. So let me open this CSS for you. Properties. I'll go here. I will open this. Right. So can you see this is yellow and this is red, right? Yellow because it has a class applied to it. This paragraph has a class applied to it, right? And that class is class equal to f name, and this has ID attribute equal to this, which is a background color as red, right? So hash is for ID and dot is for class name. Similarly, if you see an element like this, input hash of username means find an input tag wherein ID equal to input, ID equal to username, right? Yes, no. So in this case, if this was the case, it would be p hash first name, right? So p is the tag, yes, and hash or the id is f name, right? Then okay, so let me try some of this what I have explained so far. So let's say I want to try out this one, right? So let's try with this example which I have just shown to you, which is css1, right? This is css1. So let me open this. Okay, so let me open that URL first of all for you in the this is the URL, right? So I'll take it, I'll put it in the code here, right? So let me first put it here. Let me comment this one, I don't need this. So now I'll say driver dot find element by dot css selector, right? And it is, what is the tag, or tag was, let's right click view page source, view page source, it is p hash of f name, right? So by tag p hash of, what was that, f name, right? That is what we are trying to do, right? Tag name hash of the id. So it will return me that particular element, right? So I'll say web element we equal to, now I'll try to display the text of that. So sys out of we dot get text, right? So it, what this is, which one, f name is second one, right? F name is second one, so it should give that I live in Duckburg, right? So let's try to run this program. Let me run this program, right click, run as Java application. So let's see what is the output that we are getting. So it gives me I live in Duckburg, right? Yes, if I had done p dot of, so if I had done it p dot of what is that, p dot of first name, right? Then I'll get the earlier one, right? Because that dot is for the class that we have made use of, right? Then after this, now now if I want to find an input tag which has an attribute name with a value equal to username, actually this is in single quotes, it needs to be corrected. So suppose I want to find, let me again use this particular one. Okay, so let me open up the earlier page which we were looking at. So if I open this page, right click view page source, right? So now if I want to find out an input tag which has name attribute as equal to this much, right? So this is input tag name attribute equal to this. It is in single quotes, it's not shown here, but it should be in single quote, right? So if I go back here, first of all I have to take this URL, right? The earlier URL, I'll put it here, fine. And then I will go here and maybe I'll comment it. I don't need this one. I'll take this one. I don't want to type the whole thing once again. So I will go here and say find an input tag, right? Find an input tag where name equal to, sorry, we have to input tag when name name equal to in single quotes. What is the name? The name is this one, first underscore name, right? So this is the way I can specify it, right? Now you might ask a question that this we can do dot by name as well, right? But I will tell you in some time that it is much more flexible than how you were doing. We can do it with driver dot find element by name and this name, right? We could do this, but it is more flexible. Why so? Because the earlier approach was a subset of this one. I mean, you have this capability plus other capability. You can even put here one more attribute and say and value equal to empty, and value equal to maybe something empty, right? So what it is going to do is it is going to find an input tag where name attribute is this, and value is this, right? So it is more flexible compared to the earlier one, right? So that's what the next one I was going to do, that if you want to find an input tag with type equal to submit and value equal to login, right? For example, you were working on this button where type is button and name is this, and maybe one more attribute is something else, right? So you can, it's much more flexible than the earlier approach you had taken, right? So this is an AND approach. This and this. If you want to try OR, then you can say this, you separate it with the comma here. You put a comma here, so it says name is this or value is this. Okay, so that this is the slight difference. Similarly, you can say that image tag is to display images, right? Image tag which has an ALT attribute, meaning that I'm not worried about the value, but it just has an ALT attribute. If I say like this, that for example, find a input tag which has name attribute. What is the value? I'm not worried about, but it should have this attribute present, right? So if you say find element, it will give you the first element. If you say find elements, it will give you all the elements, right? Similarly, I can also say not. So if you will say like this, img colon not. So initially it was input containing this attribute. If you want to say does not contain this, means find an image tag which does not contain this ALT attribute, right? Any other tag of image which does not contain this attribute. So it is much more powerful and much more flexible than the class name that we had used. Class name is simply element name dot of that class name, right? But you can see that it has options to see whether attribute is this, and option is there, or option is there, not option is there, right? So it's much more flexible than what we had done earlier in the case of class name.